This is Kate from the Narrate team. What place does church have in your life? Continuing in our What the What series, Adam takes an authentic and healthy look at our engagement in the church. He explains the concept of expanding grace and how that applies to our vision here at Narrate.
I still haven't figured out how to follow that video. The best part is we don't know who that is, or at least I don't. I think the artists do, but I have no idea who the guy in the hooded thing was. Do you ever spill water in your nether regions when it's like least convenient? I had that happen last service, but it was right there, which right before I got up on stage, which reminded me last night. So we got to be part of this wedding last night, and the guys, the ladies took over our dressing area. We were trying to get away from them. Like the bride just couldn't keep her hands off the groom, so we just had to keep moving rooms. And so we finally went to the weight room, and we realized that they wouldn't follow us into the weight room, and so we were all gathered in there, and there was a drinking fountain in there. But this is one of those poorly designed drinking fountains, and so minutes before we had to walk out the door and walk up in front of a bunch of people, I went and took a drink of water. And I didn't realize till I was over, but this is one of those they used to invent drinking fountains that actually caught the water. Now they're flat. I don't know why they're flat, and it just splashes all over you. So I got done getting a glass of water, and I looked, and I had these little white dots from like waist to knees. I know this is awkward for you, but it was more awkward for me last night. So I'm looking at my pants. It looks like I've stood too close to the urinal, if you know what I mean, guys. So, this is bad stuff. So I'm like, what do I do? And Toby, every bridal party has that guy. He grabbed a towel and just started waving it in front of me in the region. And the gals came walking out of the bathroom through the weight room, and you could see them look at us, and he's just, carry on. And I was dry by the time I arrived, so it was a good thing. If you're a guest with us, we're thrilled that you're here. If this is home for you, it's an honor to be the church with you. Some of you remember, and if you weren't a part of it last week, you'll certainly want to grab that podcast. But a guy named Brian Manley was with us last week. He's an artist in Atlanta, Georgia, has been instrumental around this place in helping us form and kind of brand our identity, and as a friend of a friend that's become a good friend now, actually, of my own. He and I were hiking down Mount Ascension last week. I drug him to the top of 2 peaks in Helena last Saturday morning. It was fun. And on our way down Mount Ascension, we were having a conversation that caused me to begin to reminisce all the way back to my mid and late 20s, just a few days ago, and just remind me of some real instrumental things that really play into the series we're in called What the What. What he was reminding me was that when I was around, 25, 26 years old, somewhere in there, I had this really remarkable opportunity. As I was on staff at a church in Billings. It was a great church with great leadership, and at the time I was leading the high school ministry, which we called 180, and kind of centered around Wednesday nights, and then got to be a part of this 20 and 30-something community that met in this kind of club, kind of bar vibe feeling thing on Sunday nights, and that was fun as we were wrestling with things together. And so I was busy with what was already a busy job, fast-growing church. It was kind of crazy. At the same time, our family was expanding. We were. How did Sarah say that earlier? We were creating people. Is that how she said that? Is that producing people? Yeah. My wife and I were busy producing people. Now we just practice producing people. And so let that one sink in for a second. Are we there yet? Does anybody want to go home? I can close my eyes. So things were hectic, and at the time I was. What also happened was there was some theological thinkers that began to really influence myself and many of my friends. Many of you were here, and we began to rethink our understanding of Jesus and in many ways church, as we began to just recognize that to follow Jesus is to be a servant. It's to lay your life down for the sake of others. And while lots of other things are important, like if that becomes the win, then all those other things happen. But if those other things like community and holiness and all those things, if they become the goal, then we just become Pharisees who do all the right things and don't do the wrong things, but we just live lives that are all about ourselves. And so I was in that season kind of beginning to wrestle with that, and that's what began to give us the eyes to see opportunities that otherwise I wouldn't have seen. And one of them was my neighbor. Her name was Mary. She must have been in her mid-80s. She was in a wheelchair, but clearly, she hadn't been her whole life. She was in a wheelchair because of her age and some medical things that were going on. Meals for Wheels brought her meals. So my house in Billings was built in 1910, and the guy who built mine, lived in mine. This was his house, and he built the next 2 or 3 along the block because this is the way they did things right back then, right? So I was on this little tiny lot, a Model A-sized driveway separated my house from her house. And she didn't have time to take care of her house. She couldn't take care of herself. She didn't have the physical ability. And every once in a while, some what looked like family would show up, but not very often. I remember one summer, my wife decided she was going to mow her backyard because the weeds were like up to her waist. And as she was mowing her backyard, she happened upon a dead cat. I mean, cats are disgusting when they're alive, but when they're dead, it's even worse. And she stuck a shovel underneath this carcass and was going to carry it to the garbage can. And I wasn't there to see it. I was playing Xbox. But these like maggots streamed like liquid from this cat. Like it had been dead for a long. Yeah, it's just nasty. So what I noted was that the paint was falling off her house. I mean, this is that little thin siding, cool wood siding, and you could have literally walked up and just pulled chunks of paint and been all the way down to the bare wood. And so I had this thought, and this was kind of this crisis moment for me, well, built up to a crisis moment, where I thought, like, it wouldn't take much. Like, I could rally just a few friends, and we could, Saturday or maybe a Saturday and a half of a Sunday, we could scrape that side of the house down, prime it, paint it. Probably, if we pooled our money together, it'd cost us $100. Like, we could do this. This would be easy. And yet the crisis that happened was a few years later, I remembered that idea and realized I had done nothing with it. And so I had this moment where I realized, and I've said this a lot since, and many of you, this maybe captures some of your stories, especially if you're on this journey. We were on this together, many of us. I had this moment of like, I am so darn busy like doing church that I don't have time to be the church. And there was this very much this crisis of, it wasn't a crisis of faith, it was a crisis of church for me. And I began to kind of rethink everything like, okay, Lord, how ironic that I'm teaching the Bible twice a week and leading these communities and doing all this good stuff. And then there's this old woman who lives next to me and the paint's falling off her house. And my wife can find time to mow her lawn, but I can't find time to rally some dudes to paint her house. And the result was I became precariously close to the idea of just stepping out of church. Or at least church as I know it. I began to contemplate, I think maybe I should quit my job as a church, working for the church, and get a real job. I had a degree. I figured I could get something. Somebody would pay me to do something. And then this group of friends, the 10 or 20 core of us that were kind of doing this Mosaic and 180 thing together, then we could just kind of do life together and do church together in our living rooms and just kind of do that thing. And yet I'm grateful for the fact that there were influencers in my life that had helped me already understand that when you come to questions that are that big, you don't make decisions overnight. You open your Bible, you consult people, you ask questions because you don't learn anything when you talk, you learn when you ask. And so that kicked me into what was a couple year or year and a half probably long journey of just like, okay, Lord, like what's right here? What do I do here? How do we land our desire to follow you? And it strikes me that like that quandary it's consistent with all of our stories. That no matter where you're at in your spiritual journey, we could probably place you into one of a few categories. And I know that can get offensive, so please don't be offended. But I think to really capture where we're going this morning, it might be helpful for you to understand like where are you as it relates to like church and what's the point? Because some of you probably, and to be sure, there's not very many of you here because you wouldn't be here if you fit in this category, or not very many people would be here if they fit in this category. And that is just because you've never really understood the point. Like you weren't raised in church, maybe you were raised Christian, maybe you were raised to follow God, but like the organization, the community, the institution, whatever word you want to use, it just never served a purpose in your life. Maybe you're one of those, you showed up on Christmas and Easter, but you just never really got this and the offering and all that kind of serving, like it just didn't ever really make sense to you. Maybe you believe in God, maybe you're an atheist. But for many of us, and certainly a lot of people who aren't here this morning, it's just completely, it's just something that you've never even considered. And if you're here, that's probably because someone you really love and respect is like began to have conversations with you, and they have enough credibility to go, hey, you should come check this place out, where he awkwardly talks about his crotch for the first couple minutes. Or maybe you're going through a crisis of your own. Crises do that. They cause us to rethink everything. Maybe you're going through a relational crisis, a medical crisis, financial crisis, and you're here hoping for some answers. There's a second category, and the second category, I think this is the one that many of you are probably in, and yet, quite frankly, probably a lot of us who are in this category aren't here either. The second category is those of you where you used to understand the place of it, but not anymore. I mean, there was a time when you were a kid, or there was a time when you were newly married, or there was a time when you were in college, or there was a time a couple years ago, maybe even speaking of Narrate, where you very much bought into church. You had an opinion about what it was for. Like, you were there. If it was open, you were there. Like, you had some conviction there. And yet those days have passed. And now you come to church like when your in-laws are in town, or you come to church when you treat your wife really poorly the night before and it's a way that you can help make up, or you come to church, maybe you're here because of a crisis. So some of you, there was this time where even when something like an offering was taken, I mean, you had this really strong conviction and vision, and you were this generous giver. You didn't see it as like, oh, how much are we paying that guy? It was just like you got it. And now, maybe you're still here and you're here all the time, but I've been there. I guess that's why I can relate, where you go like, well, if they needed my money, they wouldn't buy lamps. So no, I'm not doing that. Or, we know statistically that people, and this isn't about us, this is about you and your heart, but we know statistically over and over and over again what research tells us is people stop giving before they stop attending. And that's not in any way to twist your arm, just to state the fact that if there was a time where you gave and now you don't, like, there's something you got to pay attention to there. Because Jesus tells us where your heart is, like, there your treasure will be. Or maybe there was a time where, like, you used to serve, but now you don't serve, you just attend. And we recognize some of you are in a recovery program from church, and we create space for you to do that for as long as possible. But maybe there was this time, like you were in the band, you were on the tech team, you ushered, maybe it was here, maybe it was somewhere else. Maybe for some of you, I would think that you're at this place, I know because I have these conversations, and it's always hard for me to process them with people because I have a horse in the race, if you know what I mean. But maybe you're at this place where you're here if you're on team. Like if you're in the band, or if you're ushering that week, if you're making coffee, or if you're helping with Bridget. But if you're not, you have this sense of you wake up on Sunday like, we don't have to go to church today. So some of you kind of, it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, And I know this is maybe a little awkward, but I just think we have to have these conversations. And then for others of you, like, you're here. And you serve, or you give, or you do all of the above, and like you're involved, you're doing things. And you hear, like, we're shutting down on Labor Day for all our volunteers who are always here, and you're like, what am I going to do on Sunday? Like, I shouldn't even get out of bed. Like, this is like your thing. And even for you, though, I think the danger is that the crisis that I hit was I thought I knew what I was doing, and then I realized, like, wait a minute. Maybe I have the best of intentions, but I'm wasting my time. So really this morning, see, we're in this series called What the What. And the reason we're in this series is we recognize that as a church that's coming up on our 5th birthday, that'll be the first Sunday in October, we recognize that sometimes what we do looks like a dude on a pogo stick with Zumba pants on. Remember those? Nobody? MC Hammer, Zumba, stripes. Really? Come on, am I that old? I suppose you don't know what a Nintendo or a Commodore 64 is either, do you? He's like, what is that? Okay. I have no idea what I'm supposed to say next. So there's this, we're having this conversation because we recognize that, like, it's Playable Playgrounds, really, is that church? And this series is about us going, no, there's deep theological conviction about why we do what we do and why we don't do what we don't do. And so we've just taken some time to go, here are some observations we've made of God and his character. And here's the way it forms and shapes this culture. So we've talked about the cultural commission. We talked about about this idea of common grace. And this morning I want to talk about what the term I like the most. You have to understand, of course, that every theological term is a construct. This isn't a biblical phrase. This is things that people who study the scriptures go, okay, here's this principle. And N.T. Wright calls this principle the principle of expanding grace. This morning, I think to really begin to think about why church, maybe one of the most helpful things is to go, hey, what's God's heart for his grace to expand? And as we think about why playable playgrounds and not a giant Bible study, why a beer festival and not a Christian school, both of which have their place, but why one emphasis and not the other? I think to get that, for better or for worse, we've all got to pay our fee and make our choice. One of the things that could be helpful to understand is this idea of expanding grace. But before we jump into that, one more thing that I think could be helpful to think through. Have you ever had lunch with somebody, coffee, any of the above, and walked away going, "Bleh, they are so self-absorbed"? Now, I assure you, I don't ever do this with any of my interactions with you, so don't get self-conscious. I'm pretty sure you all do it with your interactions with me, so just, we're okay. But you know what I mean? Like, you ever have something you really wanted to talk to your spouse about, or you really wanted to talk to a friend about? There's this thing that happened at work, and you really wanted to process, and you got like 6 sentences out, and then all of a sudden, they're like a gymnast. They springboard off of this thing you were going to talk about, and all of a sudden, we're talking about their kids, or their work, or their problems. Do you know what I mean? And sometimes it's amusing. You just go, okay, whatever. I was just wanting to have a beer and pass an hour anyway. But sometimes it's like, no, I wanted to talk. Do you know that feeling of like you just took captive the entire conversation? Ever have someone you really respect and you really want to process something with them, but they just can't stop long enough? It's like Stephen Covey. I've been reworking through his book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and he talks about listening, and he says this whole thing is like you going to the doctor and saying, "Hey, my eyes are blurry." And you get about 2 minutes of explanation out, and he takes his glasses off and hands them to you and says, "Put them on. These work great for me. They ought to work for you." And you put them on, and you say, "No, actually, it's making things worse." And he's like, "Well, that doesn't make any sense because they work great for me." Because, see, the expectation we have of doctors is that before they prescribe, they diagnose. Do you ever feel like someone's prescribed something to you before they've diagnosed you? See, if you can relate to that sense of like, blah, disgust, bleh, like I like them, but I don't know that they're that person I can process life with. If you can relate to that, then here's the good news. No matter what you believe about Jesus and whether or not he was God, you guys actually have a lot in common. Because part of the way that you can begin to explain Jesus and why he did and why he said what he did is that he had this deep-seated passion that we take our eyes off of ourselves and pay attention to those around us, that we develop enough self-awareness that we stop just thinking about our own problems, but we can see other people's problems. See, the thing with Jesus is what got him killed was he was looking at a bunch of people going, "Hey, high five, but I'm not here for you. Hey, high five, but I'm not here for you." He was grossed out by the very things that we're all grossed out with. And there's a lot of places that we can go on this, but I want to go to Luke chapter 4. Now, I'm not checking my text messages, though I do see that Kyle Ball just texted me, and Tom Brady blew his ACL. Just kidding. But parenthetically, I realized last week that the only time I touch my paper Bible is on Sunday mornings at church. I keep losing them because the only time I use it is here. Like the rest of the time, Sports Illustrated, the internet, I don't even read my Bible. Just kidding. What I realized is, I'm sorry, but I read digitally exclusively, and so I'm kind of tired of being a poser, so I'm going to use YouVersion from now on. So I'm going to read from my phone, which means that you can read from your phone and we won't judge you. Or you can text from your phone and we still won't judge you, though we should. So what I want to go to is there's lots of places in Jesus' life. Kate, by the way, sent out an email and created a Facebook post as to how to use this great free app called YouVersion. Jesus' first ever sermon is maybe the best place to really begin to understand this incredible passion that he had. Because if you want to understand a leader, one of the best ways to understand what they're about is to look at like the first time they get a chance to talk. Because then life gets busy and we can get off the rails. Thinking of the very first message at Narrate, going all the way back to June of 2009, the very first thing we did was we put a pool table on the stage and we talked about this rhythm of gathering and scattering, and we said that's the rhythm we see God has for us. So Jesus' very first sermon, it starts this way. Here's kind of the narrative intro. He went to Nazareth, he being Jesus, where he'd been brought up, and on the Sabbath day he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. That's challenging in his own right. God had a custom of attending. Wow, I'll let someone else talk about that. He stood up He stood up to read. Now, what he read is what's really telling, and yet what we have to, just to kind of be clear here, there's some historical debate about what he read. Some would say that the scriptures in Israel followed some kind of a lectionary, which means that there was a cycle, a 4-year, an 8-year, a 2-year, depending on the tradition cycle, where this scripture would have been read predictably. Many traditions still do this, particularly like Catholics and Lutherans. It's great. People who do the lectionary, unlike me, they deal with all the texts, not just the ones that are convenient and helpful. Some would say that that's what Jesus was doing, was he just stepped in on the day where he knew this was going to be the passage. Others would say, no, he picked it. Whatever. Doesn't entirely matter. Here's what he read. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Now, it's really easy for Western evangelical people to hear that and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it sounds just like Little House on the Prairie. It sounds just like Precious Moments. Like, that would make sense. What's hard to capture is that what Jesus was doing here was being highly offensive. And we'll unpack that for just a moment. But it starts by understanding that in Jesus' day, the poor, the oppressed, the downtrodden, the assumption was, whether you were Jewish or just of a Roman spiritual, what they would call a cult religion or whatever your spiritual conviction was, the assumption in the day was that if you were born blind, if you were poor, that was because God was smiting you. And so you wouldn't dare interrupt that, because that would be throwing good money after bad, so to speak. And so Jesus steps up first and foremost and says, hey, the Spirit of the Lord's on me. I'm your guy. And everybody understands what's being said there, like, I'm your guy. And then he proceeds to quote a verse from the prophets that says, and because I'm your guy, my emphasis isn't on you, it's on them. And part of where we can begin to understand that this is what's going on is going to verse 22. Now, this is a tough verse to translate. I really like N.T. Wright's translation because to me it's consistent with the text, so I'm not going to read my phone there. I'm going to read from a bigger screen. In verse 22 it says this, everyone remarked at him. They were astonished at the words coming out of his mouth, words of sheer grace. Now probably you've heard it said that he was so eloquent of speech that they were like, wow. But that's not what the context would say. The context would say what he was saying was scandalous. He was their guy. He was their Messiah. And suddenly he's saying to them, hey, good news. The guy you've been waiting for is here. Bad news. He's not here for you. And that started to create a stir. So much so that, like, look at their response to him. Going all the way to the end of that little text. This is where the fingerprint thing on the iPhone fails us, doesn't it? Okay, so, no, really, it's 2326. Okay, good. Did I just say that? So all the people, this is the way they responded to Jesus' message. And he offers some commentary. We'll circle back to that. But like, I've preached some bad sermons. You've built some bad houses. But I don't know that this has ever happened. All the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. I mean, you've heard of business deals gone bad. That's bad, right? And it raises the question, okay, so what happened here? How did they take their guy, their all-star, their anointed one, and suddenly go, we got to kill this guy? Well, the answer has already been hinted at. And it's hard for us to capture in our Western minds, but if you start going backwards just a little bit, you begin to see. You see, when he offers commentary, he says, what he says would be like, you know, a guy getting the job as the head football coach at Helena High, and it's the first day going, man, those Capitol High Bruins, they've got it figured out. Be like someone coming to my house and talking about how great the Raiders are. Like, no, you don't do that. See, he offers commentary, and he gets at, like, if they had a Hall of Fame, one of the guys that's on the short list is a guy named Elijah. So he takes their hero, and listen to what he says. He says, I assure you that there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's time. And some of you remember the story. People were dying because there was a severe famine. When the sky was shut for 3.5 years, and there was a severe famine throughout the land. I mean, so he is just reeling them in. Remember, there was Elijah, and there was this prophet thing that happened, and God wanted to send Elijah to feed somebody. And then he says, yet Elijah was not sent to any of them, but to a widow in Zarephath in the region of Sidon. Hey, you guys remember Elijah? Yeah, he's the best. Did it ever occur to you that there were lots of people dying and lots of widows who had need, and God didn't send Elijah to any of your people. He sent it to their people. Like, he didn't send it to the Christians. He sent it to the Muslims. What? He continues. There's this other prophet, and sometimes they get confusing, and if you can't pronounce them differently, you just say it fast so that no one can tell, because there's this other prophet, Elisha, and he continues. And there were many in Israel with leprosy in the time of Elisha the prophet. Yet not one of them was cleansed, only Naaman the Syrian. Hey, remember Elisha? Remember all those people who were dying of cancer, and all these people were praying for God to heal them? He didn't heal any of the Christian ones. He sent his prophet to the ones who didn't even bother with church not once in their life. And he healed them. And you start going, okay, now I can kind of see why I'm running. Like, we're paying your salary, dude, and you're here telling us you're not here for us? See, they were after a prophet. They were after a leader. They were after a Roman leader who would come overthrow Rome. We know this. You know this. The historical manuscripts have this very violent language to them where the Jews were waiting for this leader who would come sabotage Rome and establish the kingdom of God in the form of Israel on earth. And Jesus is going, I'm here to do all of that. But I'm going to do it with them, not you. It's like Jesus is saying, hey guys, did it ever occur to you that when the prophets were active on the planet, like it wasn't the Jews who benefited, it was the non-Jews? Guys, have you ever noticed that God has always been a God who keeps saving the wrong people? Ever notice that? I had this experience last August. I went to, Vern and I swapped, so I went to Harvest and he came here. They definitely got the short end of that stick. And after one of the services, this gal came up to me who I grew up with, I went to school with. Her name was Mackenzie, 1st through 12th grade. I grew up in Laurel, 140 kids or so. So it wasn't like we were buddies, but you know each other. And she came up to me after one of the gatherings there at Harvest, and I was like, wow. And we had that like, I can't believe you're here. I can't believe you're here. And it's always more dramatic when it's like, I can't believe you were just standing on the stage. Well, wow, okay. And she said, and I said something really awkward to her, like, I can't believe you're here. And very warm and hospitable, which is why we hire Sarah, because I don't help with those conversations. And and she said, well, actually, Adam, I started coming here while you were still on staff, and then when I heard you were on staff, I stopped coming here. I'm not making this up. I was a good guy in high school. I said, oh, thank you for that. Like, be warm and well fed, you know. And she said, and then you left, and I came back. Just keeps getting better. And we had this exchange of like, basically what she was acknowledging is, okay, so I'm accepting that God keeps saving the wrong people. And I'm going, yeah, I'm accepting the same thing. So peace. Ever notice that? Like the coworkers that you really want to start coming to narrate with you, they're not the ones that start coming to narrate with you. It's the ones you don't really like, right? Have you noticed that? No offense. Like some of you are them. Like when you started coming, I mean, there was like, did you see who was here? Oh my gosh, did you see who was at church? It's like, oh, and I'm proud of us. I think that the gossip level is low and we create a safe context, but let's be honest. Some of you, when you go to a family reunion, it's like, did you hear that so-and-so found religion? Right, they found religion? Yeah, but they still smoke. Yeah, I don't know, but they found religion. You know? See, what Jesus is warning us is be careful. Because it's blessed to be a blessing. And the warning he's offering Israel is, you guys. And in fact, there's another story in Luke 16. You should go read it. I was going to read it. Didn't have time this morning. It's this confusing story about an owner and a money manager, and the money manager is like dishonest, and then he's more dishonest, and then he gets commended, and it's really confusing. You could email me, and I'll send you a photocopy of a commentary that makes the hard parts less confusing. But he ends the whole parable by saying, see, here's the problem. Like those people who don't live their lives for God, they get it more than you do. They understand that their job is to use all their resource and all their skill to make friends with outsiders. You guys spend all your energy tightening your belts and tightening the strings and making it more and more difficult to be a part of your little holy huddle. It's challenging. It's messy. And it kind of, for me, brings me back to that place in my late 20s of like, okay, Lord, what do I do? And I think it brings back to this category of like, where are you at? And what's the value of church? Like, why mess with it? Who's it for? You know, I had this moment last Saturday night. we were putting the boys to bed and yada, 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 and I'm kind of type A. And so we had this moment where I wasn't fully satisfied with the cleanliness of their bedroom. And I'm not saying this for dramatic effect. Like, there's no better word than to just say, like, I was a complete ass to my kids and my family. And the next thing I got to do was go to bed. And the next thing I got to do was get up and put on a microphone and talk about God. And I was so repulsed by myself in that morning. And Brian was here, and I was like, oh man, maybe I wish if we had a few more, because we had some staff on vacation, so I really wanted to just hand the microphone off and go, guys, we're all going to die if I touch the microphone. And more than that was this realization of, like, it's not just that, but my poor wife, after being on the receiving end of all that, now she's got to sit in the chairs and listen to me. And my poor kids. And I literally had the prayers, I was walking out the door, I don't even know if I was praying. The thought I had as I was walking out the door is, Lord, please don't let my wife and my kids become atheists on my account. I was serious. And then I had this realization, because we've been kind of working on this idea of expanding grace, and suddenly I remembered what it all came back to when I was 28 years old or so, and why I went from saying, hey, I'm going to quit my job, to going, hey, I want to plant a church. It was the realization that I don't have to represent God alone, that's not the call, that's not the mission. I became so grateful for you all and Narrate Kids and the people that we have meals with and the people who pour into my kids' lives, and just came suddenly realizing, like, I'm not the sole proprietor. I don't know if that's the right word or not, but it sounds fancy, doesn't it? Like, I'm not the only one influencing their views of Jesus. And I was so grateful for that I don't have the only word. And I realized that the realization I came to in my late 20s was, yeah, me and my friends, we could do this thing, and we could nerd out on, like, home church stuff, and I'm not even mocking people who do that, but the realization came, and in doing, I will adopt a faith that's about me and a few other people. And I think that's an affront to Jesus. I think the question becomes, like, do you want to represent Jesus by yourself? N.T. Wright, he talks about to be an image bearer, which is a Genesis 1 word, is not to be a vertical mirror, because a vertical mirror is all about you. It's to be a slanted mirror, an angled mirror. See, what angled mirrors do is they allow you to peek around the corner at your brother, or like they allow a submarine to see up above the surface, or they allow a shop owner to see in places that look hidden. And what he says is that to be an image bearer is to be an angled mirror, because the role of an image bearer is that we were made to reflect back to the world who God is and what he's like. And simultaneously, we are made to reflect back to God the praise and worship that is rightfully his. And when I get to the baseline level, and I know you go, yeah, but it's your career, so of course, okay, whatever. You just have to trust me that this was a real process I went through. When I get to the base of it all, it comes down to, do I want to represent God alone? Or am I grateful that on the day when I'm a jerk, on the day I fall short, that other people are representing Christ more accurately, and that my temperament doesn't get the only word in the conversation? AA has, I think, one of the most Christ-centric statements I've ever heard. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, says, when you don't need us, we need you. And of course, the implication is, congratulations, you're sober. You can do this forever all by yourself. Good job. And yet the moment at which you're sober, we need you. We need you for the next drunk guy to do for you to do for them what someone already did for you. I think the conversation about why church, and listen, I'm not trying to twist anybody's arm and make you feel guiltily involved here. Like, we kind of have a seat problem, so it's not like that. But the question is, like, who's your faith about? Who's it for? Because the theme in the scriptures is the moment God blesses someone, he says, good job, I love you, you're so great. Now it's not about you. That's not about you. I had this experience last summer, and we'll end on this. after one of those messages at Harvest, actually, which tells me I should go back there more often because I get lots of good sermon illustrations. This couple came up to me, and they're in their 60s, I'm going to guess. There's no winning when you're guessing those things, is there? Their names are Merrill and Elaine Watkins. They were the parents of one of my friends growing up. He was his only child. His name was Merrill as well. We were friends to the extent that, like, when there was a crew of us who decided we were going to go to the University of Montana together, he was a part of that crew. And they come up to me at Harvest with these giant, nerdy smiles on their face. They were just so excited. And I was completely shocked to see them there. Kind of. Because going back, the previous October, I'd been at some meetings at Harvest, and they showed a baptism video, their annual baptism video, and it was different than what we do, but they showed this video of all these people getting baptized simultaneously, and I couldn't believe as I was watching this thing, there's Merrill, this 65-year-old dude, the last dude that I would have ever expected to be in church and get baptized, and at a season in life where, let's just be honest, that doesn't happen to very many 65-year-olds. And so now he's standing in front of me, and I'm like delighted because I've been like, wow, this is amazing. And they're just ecstatic. Oh, yeah, this has been so great. So thankful for this church. So blah, 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 blah. Son Merrill's up in the kids ministry. They're volunteering with the kids. They got babies, and they're just beaming smiles. Fast forward a few months, my phone rang, and it was my dad. And generally when my dad calls, someone in Billings died. It's just, I don't mean that in a cynical way at all, but it's just like, okay, who's dead? Said, hey, Adam, did you hear what happened to Elaine? No, I said, I just talked to her a few months ago. He said, she had some routine procedure, went home afterwards to take a nap and never woke up. And I had this like, wow. And it all kind of comes full circle, you know? Because I realized that me and my friends and Vern and his friends, their faith would be perfectly secure if they were just kind of doing life together and having some Bible studies and making brownies. Everybody would be just fine. And yet Elaine and Merrill's story would be way different. Merrill wouldn't have this great church to support him as he grieved. They'd just retired. I mean, it was one of those terrible stories. They wouldn't have this church to kind of step in for the place of a mom and a grandma. See, what Jesus takes us to over and over and over again in the scriptures is who is your faith about? Who's it for? What's the point? And you know, I think it's a perfect segue just into baptism in general. Listen, as we come up on our annual baptism thing, and this isn't about numbers, but this is about an experience. And all that reminds me, you know, baptism serves a couple purposes. It's for you and it's for us. But in our culture, it's really for us. And I'd just like to challenge you. Like, if I understand the video is uncomfortable, writing your test, like, raise your hand if you like to talk on a screen in front of people. Okay, good. We're all in the same boat. It's uncomfortable. But can I just challenge you and say it's really not about you. It's just not. Okay, so it kind of is. And I could tell you stories. Like, there's a gal last year who got baptized, a 40-something gal. She got baptized, did all the work and preparation. We had great conversations. She wrote her story. She recorded it. She got baptized. 6 months later, she was in my office telling me how great her life had been for the last 6 months. She didn't expect that because actually her plans were that she was going to get baptized and commit suicide because she wanted to make sure she was right with God, but she really didn't want to be here anymore. And the whole process was such a game changer for her that the last 6 months of her life were the best ever. So yeah, there's things that happen as you work out your story. But you know what? More than that, baptism, it's about the people who write checks to make this possible. It's about the people who get here at 5 o'clock in the morning on Sundays. It's about the people who work 50 hours Monday through Friday and then show up on Saturday to build a playground. It's about the people who have poured their life into creating a place for people to make Jesus as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. It's about them getting to celebrate what God has done and have it affirm to them that all that energy and all that work and all those mornings and all that money and all that lack of family time and all the sacrifice, that it all actually served a purpose. And frankly, it's about God. It's about a community getting to give God the worship that is due him for changing the lives of people. Listen, if you've met Christ in the last weeks, years, and never been baptized, I just challenge you to do that. And if you have a church for the first time in your life, for the first time in a long time, fantastic. That's why we've worked so hard. And yet it's not about you anymore. It's about those people out there who we would love for them to have the same experience you've had. And so we've organized ourselves around expanding grace. And the reason why we talk more about a beer festival and more about a dodgeball tournament and more about building playgrounds than we do Bible studies and things like that is because we go, no, we're going to serve people. And servants will become disciples because it'll become so hard to be a servant if you're not a disciple that you'll become a disciple.
If you would like to engage further with Narrate Church, you can find contact information online, www.narratechurch.org. We would love to hear from you.